everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. My name is Sarah Rose Leonard. I'm a live events producer here at KQED, and I'm here to welcome you to KQED Live. For those of you who don't know, KQED is Northern California's PBS NPR member station, and KQED Live is our new multi-platform events program that produces screenings, talks, performances, food events. It's all based on KQED's mission to inform, inspire, and involve, and you can learn more at kqed.org/live. So if we bring value to your everyday life, if you're KQED fans, I encourage you to consider becoming a member. You can do so at kqed.org/donate. And we want to thank our season sponsors tonight. That is Berkeley Rep, Comcast Business, SF Symphony, and SF MoMA. None of that would be possible without our sponsors. And tonight's host, you're in for a treat, is Alexis Madrigal. He is our co-host of Forum. He is also a contributing writer at The Atlantic and the co-founder of the COVID Tracking Project. He's the creator of the podcast Containers and has been a staff writer at Wired magazine. So he was a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley's Information School. He's working on a book about Oakland and the Bay Area's revolutionary ideas, and he's a huge plant enthusiast. So please join me in welcoming Alexis to the stage.
Hey, everyone. I was so excited that KQED wanted to do a plant nerd event. I was just like, yes, this is what I have been wanting to do here. I do host Forum at 9 o'clock in the morning on the weekdays, but germane to this event, I also am the proprietor of the Oakland Garden Club, which right now it's kind of like a space for me to think about and write about plants, both as plants themselves, but also as these portals to transnational histories, to these other ways of being, to kind of deep human time, and really the complex living processes that we often take for granted when we're doing that druidic and probably magical thing of tending to the more than human world. And of course, I also like flowers, and I think flowers are very pretty. And what gardener or wildflower hunter or like tomato planter sort of doesn't start from some place of desire like that? Or maybe sometimes it's sort of a memory, a desire for another time. While I was born in Mexico, I actually grew up in rural Washington State. And the very first thing we did when we moved into this little tiny house in kind of like the middle of a hayfield was we planted like tree after tree after tree after tree after tree after tree. And now some of them are 50 feet tall, it being Washington State. They're just enormous. Some have lived like full lives and already died. Some I'm sure are gonna outlive me, and it's been amazing to like walk under them with my children. I don't think it requires like a particularly like mystical sensibility to feel the power of another living being's like way of being itself. One of the best quotes about this I've ever read is, Rebecca Solnit goes to visit this stand of eucalyptus trees outside the home of like a formerly enslaved woman who'd come to San Francisco very early in the city's history. And looking up at them, she just wrote, "They changed the shape of time." So we're going to come back to these themes like quite a bit, what humans want from other beings and what proximity to these living things kind of does to us in turn. But before I get carried away with rumination, which I could do in this case, I just want to tell you, here's what we have in store for you. We're going to do a couple of demonstrations / conversations. We're going to kind of learn some wonderful botanical things from experts like Victoria Stewart of the Conservatory of Flowers and Kat Calloway of the UC Botanical Gardens. Victoria and I are going to look very closely at flowers, and we're going to kind of think of what are plants actually doing with flowers? What are their parts? We're going to learn the funny names for stuff. So I'm going to try and work in peduncle. So you have to, and also extra floral nectary, which I recently learned. Then Kat's going to teach us about sort of the ancestors of these modern day plants that we call crops, like maize and tomatoes. And those are really plant stories that are stories about human civilizations and the way that we've shaped this world or been co-shaped in this world by these other beings. Then there's even more. We have some amazing master gardeners in the house. We've got Flora Grub plants, and we've got vendors from the Hella Plants Market, and you're going to be able to do that. And also, I brought some feral cabbages, which were initially grown by Alex Arzt, who's an amazing artist. So we're going to do all that stuff out in the lobby after this. But first, let's bring on our first guest. Let's bring on Tori Stewart of the Botanical Gardens in Golden Gate. Welcome.
Hello.
You have a bucket of flowers here.
I have a big bucket of flowers. You can't
It's amazing. These are, plants from the Botanical Gardens. They're all combined now, the Japanese tea garden and the conservatory flowers and also the Botanical Garden, right?
Yes. So what we're going to look at today all came from the Botanical Garden, but a couple of these things you can see at the other sites. We should just jump on in.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we have our very first flower here. So first we have...
Yeah, so we were looking for something where it was sort of like, you imagine like a child draws a flower, and it's just like, it's a flower, and it has like all the normal parts of the flower, right? This is kind of what we were going for here.
Yeah, I had a hard time thinking of just like what is the most, like just this is a flower, and then camellias sprang to mind. It has all the parts. So a lot of the terminology we're gonna identify in the camellias, we'll then use as we go through.
We'll see how they get weirder and weirder all the way to calla lilies, which are the end. I'll give that away.
Exactly.
So you can all see that there. So as we go up close, you can take a look.
All right, so this is our this is a camellia flower. So camellia is part of the Theaceae family or the tea family, mostly from Asia. These ones are from China. And they are what we call perfect flowers. So they have all of their male parts and female parts in the same flower. They're doing all of the reproduction right here.
Okay, what do we call the male parts?
All right, so the male parts are the stamen, and they are the many parts in here. So there is the anther, which has the pollen, and then the filaments, which just connects it to the bottom of the flower. And so that's the male portion of it. And then inside of that, we'll kind of tear the flower open a little bit. We have the female portion, the pistil, which is the seam where the flower ends up. The stigma, the style, and the ovary, so where the seeds are going to eventually develop in the flower. But do you want to head to the outside of the?
Yeah. Talk to me about the outside. Yeah.
Okay. So we got the outside of the flower here, and we'll start at the bottom. These are the sepals. So they're these leaf-like structures at the bottom of the flower. They are a modified leaf, but they sometimes in other plants you'll see them looking a little more petaloid. They'll seem more like petals, but in the case of camellias and in many flowers, they will look like leaves. And then next up we have the petals. The petals. So again, a modified leaf. Most parts of flowers are highly modified leaves at some point in the evolutionary history. And so the petals are really what's attracting the pollinator, or one of the functions that's attracting the pollinator. So in camellias, they're typically pretty showy, big, colorful. And so that's the next layer we have here.
All right, we're going to pull it apart now.
And now we're going to pull it apart.
I know, it's like a little sad, but it's also nice.
Beautiful flower, yeah. So we'll rip it up a little. We'll get rid of the petals and the sepals, and I'll just take these leaves off because they're not doing us any good. So here I mentioned before we have our the male parts of the flower. So we have the filaments. These are these long white bits, and then the anthers, the yellow bits at the top. That's where the pollen is coming from. And in the case of camellias, there's tons of anthers, just as a way to get more and more pollen out there. They want to be able to produce seed, set seed for the next generation.
And that's where your pollinators are going to come through. They're going to pick up that pollen. They're going to carry it to other flowers, and they're going to accomplish reproduction. Yeah.
So camellias, they are both insect and bird pollinated. So it depends on the species. I'm not exactly sure which the pollinator is for this specific camellia, but you will see. Sorry, I just want to make sure I don't rip off the part that I want to tell you about. So we're getting in there, and we're going to see the female bit of the flower. So here we have this is the pistil. So we have the stigma right at the top here, and that's what's going to collect the pollen. So that's when a bee or a different insect comes in and is buzzing around, the pollen will land on the stigma, and then it's connected to the ovary, which is...
And is that basically a tube, or is it more complicated than that?
It is slightly more complicated. There's like structures inside of the style, so that stalk connecting the ovary and the stigma is called the style. So there's stuff going on in there.
Got it.
And then you'll have the ovary, which I can peel some more away. We have the ovary at the bottom in here.
Oh, let's see. People see that?
Can you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's sort of, those are all the basic parts.
Like when you have this diagram that if you search parts of the flower, you find somewhere, those are all those.
Those are the parts you're going to find. And so like I mentioned, it's referred to as a perfect flower. Feels a little rude to all the other really nice flowers, but that is the term that botanists at some point decided to go to. And next up, we are going to look at magnolias. So the Gardens of Golden Gate Park, we have a huge magnolia collection. And you can see them blooming primarily like January to March, April, but we do have some that bloom sort of throughout the year. So we had some of our later blooming ones. I was really excited to be able to talk about them today. And this is where we start getting a little bit weird.
Yeah.
So looking at this, looks like a flower, kind of looks like a camellia, just sort of face value. But what we're looking at here, first of all, I mentioned that we're going to use the terms that we looked at with camellias. There's no sepals.
But this is just a petal.
Well, that's where it gets extra weird. So there's no sepals and there's no petals. These are structures known as tepals. And so basically there's no differentiation between the petal and the sepal. And so the term is tepals. And magnolias are one of our earlier evolving plants. So they're one of our first flowering plants in evolutionary history. And so it was earlier, they weren't differentiating to that level.
And it worked. So
and it worked,
no
worked well. Very showy, attracts the pollinators. They also have some other pollination
strategies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So some magnolia flowers are thermogenic. They'll produce some heat to attract pollinators. Most of them are fragrant to some capacity. So
am I right that they're also sometimes pollinated by like beetles and other of those kind of?
So so their primary pollinator were beetles. Their ancestral pollinator were beetles. If you think about sort of the evolutionary history, beetles were around a lot earlier than bees and butterflies. And so I'm gonna rip apart all these beautiful tepals now so we can look on the inside. But you'll see there's, thank you.
I'm just curious.
Are these ones fragrant?
Moderately.
So this is a magnolia called Sensation. So as you can see here, there's many floral parts. So we have we have the stamen down here, the male portion, and then the female portion up here, the pistil. So we have many.
Wait, the pineapple thing is the pistil? Doesn't that look like pineapple to you all?
It does look like a little bit of a pineapple. Kind of has that like spiky vibe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are the pistils. It's many pistils. And so those, there's many parts to a magnolia flower, and that's partially in response to its pollinator. If you think about a beetle, they're not graceful like a bee or a butterfly. They're lumbering around, they're getting in this flower, they're knocking things off, and the flower wants to be able to produce seeds, set seed for the next generation. And also sometimes beetles will eat parts of the flower. So again, many parts to ensure that the beetle isn't just munching away at the entire flower.
Maybe this is like a dumb question, but does each of those pistils go to a separate ovary, or is it one ovary?
So there are multiple ovaries down in the underneath, sort of as we go further into the flower. So yeah, so that's a magnolia.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we have something in the aster family. So if you think about daisies, but this is what we refer to as a tree daisy. It's a genus called Rolldana from Mexico. And so at the Botanical Garden, we have a lot of plants from high elevation cloud forest in Mexico, Central America. And so we find these tree daisies, they look just like any little daisy you might see in a lawn, whatever, but they are huge, 10, 12 feet, big shrubby things.
Wow.
And so this is one of those, but looking at this, the inflorescence, so the grouping of flowers, so there's tons of flowers here, but then each of these, what probably look like flowers, are then comprised of even more flowers.
Yeah.
So, you think about a sunflower, there's the part that looks like a petal, and then the interior part, those are all individual flowers.
Right.
And so what we have here,
or marigolds, that's one of my favorite ones. Where you look at a marigold and you're like, it's a nice flower, but if you look more closely, there's a bunch of flowers.
There's so much going on, yeah. So here we have, they have ray flowers and disc flowers. So the outer ones are the ray flowers that we can see here. So the bit that kind of looks like a petal, because it is. So that is the ray flower. That's the external sort of shell of the inflorescence. And then it does have those male and female parts. And then as you go in, and this might be a little difficult to see, you can see there's the disc flowers, excuse me, and you can see the stigma, the pollen receiving part of the female organs sticking out from one of the disc flowers, which is one of the interior flowers. Wow. And those do have petals technically as well. They're fused into a bit of a cone. Hard to see unless I get out my scalpel. But yeah, so that,
just amazing to me. There's so much going on in what looks like a fairly you're
simple.
like, oh, I've seen something like this before.
Yeah, I've seen a daisy before. It's one flower, but no, I mean in certain asters there can be thousands of flowers within one flower head. So.
And what does that say about the kind of like evolutionary strategy of these plants? Would you say?
I mean, they want to produce the next generation. They want to have as much chance as possible, and so they have thousands of opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's our composite flower, our daisy. Next, I think.
Is it the dogwood?
I think it is the dogwood.
Oh, nice. These are amazing. I've never seen something like this before.
Okay. So this here is what we call a magic dogwood. So it's a species from Mexico, and so looking at this, probably similarly to the tree daisies, it looks like just one flower, right? You'd say that this is one flower, but actually, what this is, the white reflexed bits here, these are bracts. So that's actually a term we didn't talk about yet. I apologize. So a bract is another modified leaf. So many parts are modified leaves. And they typically occur at the bottom of a flower. And so you'll see them sort of further out than the sepals. So that sort of leaf-like part we saw in the camellias. And so here, though, they are the big showy bit to attract the pollinators. And in this case, they're reflexed back and just making this really, I think one common name might be like Chinese lantern, because they kind of create this lantern effect.
Can I ask one quick thing? Are all dogwood what we might have thought of before this moment as petals? Are they all bracts? Like,
Yes.
Is that one reason why you can get a dogwood that blooms and then it's just like blooming forever?
So yeah, so it has, all the dogwoods have the bracts. So those like 4 large white or pink or speckled petal-like parts that are sticking out, those are all the bracts. Yeah. And then really, so I'm gonna take this apart. So they are fused together, the bracts. The top you can see there. So I'm going to take it apart. Sorry.
That is so cool.
And then they're really similar. It's similar situation sort of to the tree daisies. It has many flowers on the inside, and again, I don't know if we can see, but it has the stigma coming out in the middle, and then the stamen, the male parts coming out on the sides to offer pollen to whatever pollinators want to come by. But yeah, I'm just I love these when they're blooming in the garden, because it's just this whole cloud of these bracts and the shape.
And what do you see pollinating them? Is it just like big bumblebee bees?
It's typically they are typically insect pollinated. So yeah. So those are cool. Those are our dogwoods, and then last but not least, we have our calla lilies, which are really funky. So I'll pull.
I already found these like so strange, just the way they can just totally disappear and then completely reappear each year. It's like the most amazing thing.
All right, so as you can all probably guess, there's probably they're not quite what they look like. So
yeah, you're like, yeah, right here are the petals, right?
Yeah, there's the petal, and there's the parts in the middle, but no. So what we're looking at here, this is actually called a spathe, which is a bract again. So another modified leaf, and again, occurring kind of at the base of the flower. And then this, the central portion here is called the spadix. And so that has all the male and female flowers.
So these little teensy tiny things are all flowers in there?
Yeah, so in here, so the top portion is all male flowers. So there's thousands of male flowers, and actually that white stuff you can see is all pollen. So I apologize to everyone who didn't bring their flonase. And then at the bottom we have, I'm gonna take this one apart.
Yeah.
At the bottom we have our, I think we might even have a bug in there maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then at the bottom we have our female flowers, and so calla lilies are monoecious, so they have male flowers and female flowers. So that's just a term for any plant that has separate male flowers and female flowers. And then they're also...
So these have no ovary.
We can't see that.
Oh, sorry.
Let's see. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
There it is. Okay, so so the top bit here, that's all the male flowers, thousands of them. And then at the base, these are all the female flowers. So then at the top, that really the sort of dense bit, that's all male parts that have opened up to release the pollen. And then at the bottom, we have the female flowers that have the stigmas and the ovaries. But calla lilies are also what is known as protogynous, meaning that the female flowers are open and available to receive pollen before the male flowers open up and release the pollen, as a way to avoid crossing or self-pollinating. Yeah. And so on this flower, the female flowers are probably, for the most part, closed up. They're all done. And then now the male flowers are presenting their pollen to whatever. They are typically pollinated by beetles and other insects. So whomever wants to come into the flower and take some pollen. So
That is so cool.
yeah.
We're going to have a little more conversation with you after we have our next guest, and we're going to be able to ask questions too. I know there's probably a lot of questions in the audience about different kinds of flowers and different kinds of structures. But first, Tori, thank you so much for showing us all this stuff.
Really fun.
So cool. Up next, we have another little miniature demo, and then we're going to have a little conversation. Thanks, Tori. I actually met Kat, our next guest, at the Botanical Garden when I was there with my kids doing a scavenger hunt. And Kat tends, one of her jobs as a horticulturalist is she tends the ancestral crops of many of the crops that we use now. Yeah, come on out, Kat. Kat Calloway, welcome to the stage. Yeah. Yeah, come right here. Do you have your own tail thing? Oh, it's over there. Yeah. And one of the things that she said is we were kind of looking around, trying to find, what's interesting about these plants that are, the ancestors of our current crops. And you happened to show me teosinte, which some people may know is an ancestor of maize. So tell us a little bit about teosinte and what we're looking at there.
Okay, so these are seeds. This is the seeds of the teosinte plant. It is actually in the same species as the corn you and I know and love today. It's got its own subspecies, and in fact, there's multiple wild subspecies of teosinte. And modern corn was actually, it sounds like, derived from an admixture of two subspecies. So this was like a hybrid situation. Corn was originally domesticated from the Zea mays parviglumis, which is this guy right here. And then later on, it was, and it actually traveled that way. There's maybe like 6,000-year-old domesticated corn from this single ancestor that they found in South America. So it had traveled from Central America down to South America by then. But it had this disadvantage that since this is a lowland tropical to subtropical species, it didn't really do well either at high elevation or at farther latitudes from the tropics. And in Mexico, it was eventually hybridized with another subspecies that is a high elevation subspecies, and so it has less of the day length and temperature constraints that make it hard to grow anything domesticated from the species. And so that hybrid domesticate was actually then traveled far and wide and made it into farther reaches of North America and the farther reaches of South America and the Andes.
And it was that crossing that basically allowed it to become kind of a true staple crop, like a thing on which like all of Mesoamerican culture is built.
Well, you know, I imagine within Mesoamerica, this single domesticant was also quite effective on its own, but that's what allowed it to basically take over the world, is you can grow corn a whole lot of places. And you can't, I don't know if you can even find modern domesticated corn that's not a result of that hybridization of the two subspecies. Yeah, Jeffrey Ross Ibarra is the guy who kind of ran the genetics on this and came up with this explanation.
A Davis guy?
I believe he is a Davis guy. Yeah, he's pretty cool.
What should we be looking at? What should we be noticing about this and the difference to like modern corn kernel?
Let's see if we can. One of the cool things about teosinte, I don't know if we can like show this very well, but does that show? So you can see that these three grains are actually held together through the center of the fruits. Each one of these kernels is an entire fruit. And so you can see the structure isn't cob-based. It would be really hard to show you the whole structure. I could bring you a corn cob and you would be like, that's how it grows. But with these guys, they shatter. And one of the domestication traits that's common to a lot of grain crops is the non-shattering trait. So that's where you can harvest it. Wow. And so it's partially selected for by harvesting methods. So actually a lot of like traditional California grain crops do still shatter because they were harvested traditionally over generations and generations and generations with beating baskets. So they would smack the tops of the stalks of the grain into a basket. And so they wanted it to fall off. And so that was the traditional harvesting method that resulted in the grains retaining that characteristic. Whereas like wheat, barley, oats, corn.
Right, you're sort of imagining you're like threshing the wheat. You want it to stay on there.
You want to harvest all the wheat. Yeah. So they're using a sickle or a scythe or whatever it is that they're using, a knife, scissors. And they want the whole wheat stalk into a basket, and then they want to be able to transport the whole thing to a place where they're going to go ahead and thresh it.
Yeah.
And so that is also true of corn. And so this structure right here, there's a lot of different theories about how we got from this structure right here, which is very non-cobby, to a corn cob with this central structure surrounded on all sides by fruits. One of which involves male flowers and female flowers switching places on the plant. So you know how corn cobs come out the side of the plant? Have you ever seen corn growing?
Yeah. Right.
It comes out of the crotches of these leaf axils. Whereas in wild teosinte, what you have growing there instead are side branches. So a corn plant is pretty vertical with not a lot of in the way of side branching. Whereas a teosinte plant is wide. It has lots of arms that stick out to all directions, each of which would then be fitted with tassels of male flowers as well. And so the idea that some researchers had, at least in the 80s, I don't know how popular this is anymore, was that there was something in the flower genes that made it switch from male to female.
That's so interesting. One of the other things Kat noted to me and my children who love this was that these look like little baby teeth. Definitely one of the creepier things about teosinte. Before we go over there and leave the amazed, is it like fully 100% set in stone that like this is where corn came from, and this is how
nothing's set in stone? I mean, part of the problem about the past is that we don't really know what happened, and all we can do is infer. So when we talk about domestication histories, much like when we talk about species derivations and whether something is really counting as a species or et cetera, all these taxonomic questions, is we use lines of evidence. So when you do a science, you can only ask one question at a time. That is the nature of science. And so we can't ask this big giant question of like, where did this come from? You can only be like, what does this microsatellite locus tell us about this particular stage in history? Like, does this ancestral corn that we dug out of a clay pot somewhere in the Tehuacan Valley match what we have growing in Minnesota right now? Yeah. So science is a very slow-moving process that is asked one very small question at a time, and it takes sometimes millions and millions of dollars to answer every single small question.
Yeah. I mean, I guess
There are many growth edges. You too can find out stuff. There's plenty to find out.
Plenty to find out, yeah. I guess I'm intrigued that like genomic analysis hasn't just sort of like settled most of these questions, right? That I like when I look at a scientific paper with one of these things, you see these neat little trees, and it seems to be like a very neat story about like this to this to this to this.
Oh yeah, if in those papers you'll also see these numbers associated with bootstrap percentages. You should look into those because it is really funny. I did this in my thesis, or the thesis that I never finished, but you have to do statistical
the thesis
analysis.
You considered, yeah.
The thesis that I considered finishing once. You don't have to finish grad school. It's not mandatory. But they do these statistical analysis to define like how well backed up the hypothesis is that things are more or less closely related. There's also a problem of like, you look at different gene regions to determine relatedness of different species, and I'm really sorry, I'll be done with this in a second. But it's actually quite hard to determine which gene regions are more quickly or slowly evolving than others, and that can depend on scenarios as well, and that's
where a lot of the uncertainty.
that is one of the most frustrating things about phylogenetics.
Interesting.
There's a lot of very basic stuff that we don't know.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to have an argument about. And then they change names and they move things around on the phylogenetic tree, and everyone gets upset because they have to learn new things.
I mean, I kind of love that. Here, let's sit over. Let's come over this way. Come to the living room over here, away from the demo table. Before we go into tomatoes, I did want to ask you just like, how should we be thinking about like the process of domestication? Like, how do you like think about the human tendency to do this, and how it has worked? Like, you work with these crops all the time, and you know their modern day variants. Like, as you knowing that eventually this one gets to this one, can you like see why people thought I can get from teosinte to corn?
I don't know that anybody went into it thinking that. As a matter of fact, like Jeffrey Rossibara also comments that it is unclear to us and all of science why exactly people were cultivating teosinte. There's one theory that, like sorghum or sugarcane, the stalks are quite sugary, and so people were either just chewing them for funsies or fermenting them into sort of wine and beer-like beverages, and that at some point you just had genes doing the things that they did, and somebody, or a group probably, you can't say domestication is like a thing that happened once to like one farmer on a Tuesday.
Right.
But so we don't quite know why it was domesticated. We don't know that it happened on purpose. We know that selection is happening, but there's cases like barley and wheat is a really good example, where people were clearly actively domesticating wheat. They were like, I want to eat that thing. Let's find a way to make there be more of it and have it be better. And then barley started growing in the fields. It's this wild plant, and it's really hard to tell from wheat. It's just really hard. They have kind of a similar inflorescence shape. They're grass. So it was growing as a weed in the fields, and people were just sort of harvesting it by accident, and they accidentally domesticated barley. There's numerous stories like that. It's like, is it a weed? Oops, it's food now. And then some plants will like jump the shark. So you have things like we were talking about cabbages and all of the many manifestations of that plant, Brassica oleracea, like Brussels sprouts and kale and cauliflower and all that wacky stuff, and how it is actually unclear probably where it was domesticated. If you look at the Kew Botanical Gardens website, it states the native range of Brassica oleracea is like Great Britain, Spain, and France. But some studies show that all those plants that they find supposedly growing wild in those regions are in fact feral. So you can domesticate the heck out of a plant and get something as weird and impractical as cauliflower, and then it might still be like, forget you, man.
I'm naturalizing. Yeah.
I'm getting out of here. And then they go and make weird, sad little seaside plants.
So interesting. You mentioned grasses, and one of the things that's so funny is if you go look into the agristology literature, these are like the literature of people who study grass, like the first sentence of like everything they do is like, grass is the most important thing in the world, And you're sort of like, well, but then they start to make the case, right? And they're like, without grass, basically, there's like no large-scale human civilization, because it's so many of the food crops that we depend on are all grasses, right? From teosinte to wheat, barley, all that stuff. Yeah.
I would posit that those people forget about the Andes.
Yes. She knew where I was going with this.
Sorry, it's my new obsession.
Yes. No, this is so interesting, though. There is one region of the world that did not sort of create a large urban civilization based on grass.
Yeah, they created a large urban civilization based on other stuff.
Yeah.
They found their starch in tubers like these guys, quinoa, numerous other quinopodiaceous things, amaranths. But yeah, I had this conversation with a Cal professor where he was like, grass, everybody did it. I was like, what about the Andes? And he was like, ooh, I'll get back to you about that one. So maybe he's going to find a grass and let me know.
Let's talk about tomatoes for a second here too. I think at this point the information has diffused out that like tomatoes are not from Italy, right? I think we all have gotten that far, and they're from these continents. So talk to me about like that domestication story.
Oh man, again, this is another one where there's competing theories because like the nice thing about the past is like you can go and make a lot of inferences about it, and they may differ from other people's inferences. But one of the reigning theories right now is that there are wild populations of Solanum lycopersicum of these varying different subspecies present from about Mesoamerica, so like middle of Mexico, down through tropical South America. And in tropical South America is where people domesticated them first. And they domesticated them as cherry tomatoes, so that was Solanum lycopersicum cerasiforme. And they likely traveled up probably as an accessory to other things that were being traded. So, P.S. everybody, North and South America were talking to each other and hanging out long ago, millennia ago. Everybody was hanging out with everybody. And so probably as a side effect of like carrying other products around, they got some tomato seeds smushed onto the bottom of something, and they started growing farro in Mexico. They were not a popular crop, though they were a popular crop.
Can we even have any sense of what they might have looked like? Like what would have
They were just little guys. There's just kind of cherry tomatoes at that stage, but they had selected them for color, for flavor, and for size. So like a wild tomato is like a very small dinky thing, and it doesn't necessarily taste amazing, and probably has like higher concentrations of those sort of icky solanum things that you don't want to eat. But super specific, I cannot get to you about that.
Well, then how do we get to the sort of thing that we like?
Oh, okay, so it winds up in Mexico. It becomes a weed on the edges of people's agricultural fields where they're growing all sorts of other sophisticated crops. And then at some point, it gets re-domesticated from its feral state. So like re-domestication is also kind of a fun theme in agricultural history, where plants go wild, they go feral, and then somebody catches them and is like, hey, wouldn't that be cool if we grew that on purpose? And then they grow it on purpose enough that they start developing different traits and people start selecting for them. And that's how we wind up with our full-size tomato, which of course they have in South America. So somebody on their way to South America takes this thing back down and everyone's like, oh my God, you guys made big ones? That's so great. I too will eat this.
That is amazing. I mean, what are some of the other ancestral crops? I mean, your job seems so amazing to like just be in like direct contact with these, very important ancestral crops. What are some of the other ones that you really like to actually like care for?
Oh, there's a lot of really good ones. I think one of the fun things about my job is I try and grow as much species richness in my area as I can. It's like a dollhouse-sized farm. This is like a very tiny place. But you get like half a row or a row for all of these different things. One crop that's kind of special, when I first started my job, I used to be a bike mechanic before I worked at the Botanical Garden. You can do anything. And I contacted one of my old clients because he had worked at the ecology center and did all sorts of cool eco gardening stuff. And I called him. I said, "You should come check out the garden," And he came in probably like midsummer, and he comes in and he immediately zones in on my amaranth plant. So I was growing this red amaranth plant, and he zones in. And he's like, "I know that amaranth. I love that amaranth. We got to do something with your amaranth. And I was like, all right, let's do it. And he told me these amazing stories about amaranth. It's this plant that was super culturally important throughout the Americas. There are like 3 to 5 different species that are cultivated heavily as a domesticate. And the one that was grown most commonly I don't know most commonly, but one that was pretty important in the center of Mexico was Amaranthus cruentus, which was suppressed really heavily by the Spanish when they showed up. They showed up and they were like, I can see how culturally important this plant is. Everybody's eating the corn, but they're not throwing a fit about it. Everyone was pretty excited about amaranth. They popped it into shapes, and then they would pop it, hold it together with honey. Maybe you've tried this before.
Wait, pop it like popcorn?
Pop it like itty bitty, tiny, tiny popcorn. Like I can't even tell you how tiny amaranth seeds are. They're very cute.
Yeah,
There's amaranth on the
yeah.
right side there. That's quinoa on the left. They're cousins.
Wait, but that one is enormous. Like when I've grown amaranth, it's been a more compact thing.
Yeah, there's smaller and larger
Okay.
both species and varieties. But anyway, so it's like after this is the Spanish colonizers target this as a thing of like, this is how we're going to suppress these people's culture. And it sort of goes underground for a long time. And the fact that it has like survived all of this and emerged as a thing that people are still eating, it's sort of this great symbol for like resistance to colonization. And as a matter of fact, during the war in Guatemala, not to get really depressing everybody, but during the war in Guatemala, the death squads were running around burning people's fields down, and people found ways to, seeing that this was coming to them, save their seeds and hide them to be able to come back to them later. So people saw their families murdered, their entire villages destroyed, their fields torn up and burned, and were still coming back to like grow their ancestral varieties of amaranth. And it's seeds are super important to people. Their plants are super important to people. And now there's a lot of folks out there. There's like this wonderful exchange going on between indigenous people in the Southwest U.S. and Southern Mexico, exchanging knowledge about amaranth in particular. There's a lot of very cool things that are happening.
And there's such cool things. Have people heard of second generation seeds and Kristen Leach? This is totally worth checking out, or if you live in the East Bay, go to Kula Nursery. There's a bunch of different people who are farming ancestral crops from particular places. Usually, they're, at least the people I know, are kind of second generation folks whose families are from Palestine or Iran or these other places that are difficult to access. They're able to get some seeds in some ways and start to get this new kind of direct knowledge of the plants of their ancestors. I think it's like one of the coolest things. And Kristen Leach is kind of the person who seems to be the leader of that movement, at least in a public way, and super cool to check out. Why don't we bring back Tori for just a few more questions, then we're going to go to Q&A, so we can all get out into the lobby and look at some plants. Welcome back, Tori. Yeah. So I wanted to take this part of the evening just to talk a little bit about what you think being in such direct contact with plants over, in this very intense way, like how you think it shapes the way that you approach the human world. It's like a little light question.
Haven't heard me for a while, so.
Yeah.
I think I'm just so much more aware of what's around me all the time. I apologize to my friends and family. Like when we're out and about, like I have to stop and look at plants, and I have to stop and see what's around me and things like that. And so I think it's just you kind of become a little bit more aware of what's going on around you, plant world or otherwise. So at least for me, that's how
I totally agree. I feel like as I've gotten deeper into plants, I notice many more micro seasons. You're like, oh man, the ceanothus are like going off right now. This is that tiny window. This is the window when all the nasturtiums like haven't gotten gross looking. They're still like very beautiful, and like there's all these little mini moments of walking around where you notice all the stuff. How about for you?
Oh man, I think part of it is like holding things lightly. Like we were talking about like species concepts and stuff. You can't tell what a species is just by looking at it. Like it's not there for your human perceptual systems. And sometimes things will hybridize, so you want the tree to go like this, but then sometimes the tree reconnects on the other end. I think plants do all sorts of unexpected things. The idea of like what sex a flower is like, And like you were talking about parts, it's like you look at parts, you think they're one thing. No, that's a teeple.
Right. Yeah. I also think it's done, growing plants in particular has also forced me to live on plant time sometimes. You know, like you really want, like I got a beautiful little mulberry, but you know, it's like this big. It's gonna be like a lot of years before I'm like harvesting more than one mulberry from this thing, you know? But you've just gotta be on that time. You have to like trust that like I'm gonna care for this thing for, you know, years and years, and then perhaps there'll be something there. How about when you work with these very special plants, things that other people don't really get a chance to be around all the time? Your dogwood. I don't know anyone else who's even touched teosinte before, to my knowledge. What does it do for just looking at everyday plants? Like, do you think it has changed the way that you approach the things you can buy in the nursery?
That's a good
Are you just
question.
jaded? Or are you just like,
I don't know. I think I appreciate it even more, like the plants that I grew up around, the ones you sort of have that familiarity with. You know, I love our really rare, endangered, super important horticultural plants, but at the same time, like I love a sugar maple. I'm from the Northeast. Like it's, you know, I think for me, there's an appreciation for these common plants because I'm around that rarity often. But at the same time, I really do appreciate these really magical wild plants that we get from all over the world and we have growing in the garden.
the one you have that blew my mind was is it Weltwischia? Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah.
Weltwischia mirabilis. It's like supposed to live for 2,000 years. And it's amazing because have people ever seen this? It's in the UC Botanical Garden. It's in the sort of
The arid house.
the arid house. And I think it's beautiful, but it also sort of looks dead, or like it's about to die.
Well, it's got this brown stump in the middle of it. Is that a
Yeah.
I don't. That would be a great one.
It's
Great
got
one
a
to look
thingy,
into. Yeah.
and then it grows 2 leaves for its whole life, but it grows the same leaves for its whole life, and they just ribbon out forever. Apparently, at some point, I don't know if this was at UC Botanical Garden, but there's some apocryphal story that at some point a volunteer came in and they just decided they were going to like clean up the plant, and they cut off like 20 years of growth.
They get so long and just like out, and
Yeah.
they do look a little dead.
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, which, yeah.
Yeah. If you Google it, there's some great stories. There's great footage. It's a fascinating story. Okay, last one before questions. So get your questions ready. If you could change something about the way that people think about plants, what would it be?
I have a really stupid one, but I'm done with this. I'll be in the garden and I'll be like hiding behind a shrub doing whatever it is that I'm doing, and I will inevitably hear somebody be like, "Tomatoes? Did you know it's not a vegetable, it's a fruit?" And I really just want to pop out from behind the shrub and be like, "It's both." Categories can intersect, and I feel like this is a really big message that plants have for us. It's a really dumb one, but it's important to me. How about you?
I think something that we focus on a lot at the garden is this idea of plant blindness and how so many people, there's just a green wall,
blur,
right?
yeah.
They don't really see it. And so, I love taking the time to really dive into a plant and look at plants and see the individual plants. And so I hope and I wish people, as they get more familiar with plants and see more plants and see the diversity we have, just sort of start to appreciate the individuals as opposed to that blur of just green and and also the deciduous trees in the winter are not dead, they're just dormant. That's sort of my no, it's not dead, but so that's my other.
All these people out there going, man, they come back to life.
It's amazing every year.
All right, let's grab a few questions before we wrap up here. Oh, I see one. So we got a mic. Oh, back there, in the back corner. You can raise your hand. Oh, okay, perfect.
Hi. Thanks for a very entertaining and informative session. I always grew up thinking amaranth leaves were native to South Central India for some reason because we ate it all the time. So this is interesting to know it's also from Mesoamerica, like tomatoes and chilies, which are a big part of Indian cuisine. Right. My question is, if we want to bring in native species, say from India to the US, what are the steps we need to follow to avoid invasive species or like bringing in any pests or fungus or that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. I can give you an answer based on, it's not going to exactly answer that question, but I would talk to Kula Nursery. That's like what they grow a lot of our crops native to India, and you can go talk to them because I think they've already kind of gotten around some of those things. But I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, the USDA and then is it California Department of Agriculture that has the weed database?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
If you reach out, we probably between the two of us, we can get you some of the databases. I do know that for importing seeds, like I bought seeds from a Ghanaian seed company this year, and they had to send like a phytosanitary. This was the first time I'd ever bought seeds from another country. It was like a phytosanitation certificate and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of legalities to moving any kind of plant material between countries. We will sometimes send plant material to researchers in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, and we have to work with local agriculture inspectors to make sure we're not sending any like dangerous pests or things like that. So if that is something you're interested in, there are a lot of layers to make sure you're doing it safely, especially in somewhere like California, where agriculture is so critical.
Cool. Wow. Those are the tubers?
Yeah, those are the oca
Those
tubers.
are kind of weird looking.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool tubers. If you go to the International Potato Center's website, you see lots of really nice pictures of tubers.
I got a shortcut on my desktop right
there.
there.
But at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're still scrolling, you're not going to be laughing anymore.
We have another question over there. Right there, yeah.
Hi. I have a controversial question. My name's Justin, and I'm an architect. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk tonight. It's really a lot to take in. And I'm a really big supporter of the Green Revolution and how engineering, architecture, agriculture was able to change how people lived and ate and thrived. And what I'm interested in understanding is hydroponically grown crops, vegetables, fruits, and organically grown vegetables, fruits, and crops. Is there a performance difference in terms of taste? And I'm talking about taste, not necessarily yield. I'm talking about fragrance.
Yeah, like the sensory qualities of a particular thing, hydroponic versus organic.
That depends on so many things. It depends on what you like.
Yeah.
It depends on the variety you're growing. It depends on how well you take care of it. Depends on nutrients. It depends.
Well,
on
I'll put the spin on it like this though. What I sense in that question perhaps is like, does the soil matter? Like, does the soil do something that the water does not? Even if it's the same, well, I don't know if you could call it the same nutrient mix, but even if there's,
is terroir real?
I guess, yeah. Well, let's ask that question. That's interesting. Yeah.
I don't know. Do you know?
I do not know. No.
I think the wine people would say yes, at least on that.
Wine people definitely say
Definitely
yes.
say yes. That's an interesting question.
The wine people can taste lots of things I can't taste.
Yeah. We got one right there.
Hi, my name's Homer, and I'm going to ask a question anyways because I was already about to ask it, but I thought he was going to steal my thunder. But so, can you tell us about how marijuana came to be domesticated?
Different green revolution, perhaps. Yeah. Do you know?
I don't know that history. I bet there's a lot of information about it out there. Because anything you want to know about marijuana, somebody knows it. Do you know?
I do not know. No, that is, as I was studying botany, I was always told like, if you want to make a lot of money, go into marijuana, and I was like, yeah, all set.
Yeah. Not a grass.
It is one of the things that people ask. Like,
whenever
your earlier question, one of the nice things about being a plant person is people will be like, I have to show you my plant, and they show you like a random plant that they're so excited about, and you're like, now I'm excited about that random plant too. But the other thing that happens is you're like, I do plants for a living, and people are like, let's talk about pot immediately.
Always. What are you growing? Pot. No.
So there's none at the Botanical Garden, is what you're saying?
No, we have other cannabaceous plants, but we do not have cannabis sativa or indica.
What are the other cannabaceous plants?
Hops is cannabaceous. That shares. If you look at the flowers of a hops plant, or if you like buy dried hops at the herb shop, they look kind
Dank.
of
Yeah.
yeah. That's what it looks like.
I use it, but used in both contexts, I think. Yeah. All right. There's another question there.
Hi, thanks. Really interesting program. I was wondering, is there a correlation between the color, like, organize my thoughts here. What was the first plant color, like, or flower color? Is there a connection between, like, the initial, like, senses or optics of, like, a bug and the first flower color?
Oh, interesting.
That is fascinating. So I don't know. Like, so our earlier flowering plants. So like our first angiosperms, there are a lot that are white. So not really colorful. But that being said, we also, so magnolias, I mentioned, are one of our earlier flowering plants. You see them in all sorts of colors. We have yellows, we have pinks, we have deep purples, some that have been cultivated, others that occur naturally that way. So I don't know. I mean, so...
Okay, I mean, one really interesting, at least what I'm hearing in that question is, what was the match between the optical system of like a hypothetical, beetle that's pollinating a magnolia and like what a magnolia looks like, right? I mean, it's really interesting. The other thing that I've seen on this is that that there are infrared patterns on some flowers because some pollinators like see in the infrared. Which is super cool. There's like a person who takes those like photos, and you'll see what looks like a flower you've seen before, but then in the infrared, there's like other patterns on it, which seem like they would be for not our optical system. So anyway, interesting things on that, but I don't know if we have.
I do have one more thought about that.
Oh yeah.
The magnolias and the other like early. What am I thinking of? Angiosperms. No, early diverging angiosperms we have now like aren't necessarily representative like what color it would have been then. So this is another one of these things where you're like, you could use some lines of evidence, but we will never know what color they were because those pigments wouldn't be preserved. And it's like what we have now could have diverged mightily from what we had before, and that's one of the fun things about the past is it's a mystery.
Yeah, I'm also like very curious about. Whether the shape that we see as beautiful in a flower or all these different shapes are purely like they were functional to let pollinators in, or whether there was something to that shape that was innately attractive to those pollinators. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a bit of both. It was the pollinator and the shape worked out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I say something a little bit woo-woo?
Yeah, definitely.
I think sometimes plants do things for fun. I firmly hold that sometimes they just want to do stuff, and it's okay to not be evolutionarily selected for.
I love that idea myself. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
I don't know if this is within the realm of your backgrounds, but I'm always fascinated as how people figured out what they could eat, and not just simply because maybe an animal was eating it, but things like California natives who took acorns and figured out how to get the tannins out of them before they could eat them or use
like
them.
nixtamalization of corn and stuff like that. Yeah, totally. Do you have theory?
I mean, I think people have been moving very, very slowly across the planet for a very long time, and like there's lots of transferable skills from one area to the next, and like people have survived great changes in climate and great changes in flora, and have had to get flexible about things and try stuff out. I don't know if that answers your question, but just the idea that it's like we're not, we didn't just like appear here and appear there and appear here. It's not like what's that? There's a television show where they like helicopter people into the nature and they have to figure out what to do. It's like we had ancestors.
I would want you on my team.
All humans had ancestors that were, primordial species.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to hear I have a very dumb like barroom theory of this, which is just that children eat everything. and do like all kinds of random stuff. So people are always like, can you imagine that somebody ate this? And you're just like, well, yeah, some kid probably ate it. And then they're like, is that good? Oh, all right, I guess we'll try it, you know? And even stuff, you know, I feel like if you give a child some set of things, they explore like the total possibility space of that thing like way better than we do. And they'll figure out all the weird stuff that you can do with it. And I wouldn't be surprised if the kids were the key at some level. Total folk theory, unsupported by any evidence. Past is just a story, you know what I'm saying? Let's go right here, and then we'll wrap up. Right here, yeah.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. This is kind of a weird one, but if humans were dependent on another organism for reproduction the way plants are with pollination, how do you think that, or how do you imagine that could have affected our spread across the planet or our general attitude or relationship with nature? Attitude towards a relationship with nature.
When we have our robot overlords, we're going to find out how that all works.
I mean, I would argue that we are partially dependent on flowers for our pollination.
There's a reason Mother's Day is the biggest flame. Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, those are the two big times for flower shops.
I'll leave you with that.
Thank you both so much. That was hilarious and amazing. Thank you all. You guys can go for 1 sec. We're going to bring up, we have 2 master gardeners. We're just going to introduce you to them real quick. They're going to be out in the lobby. Hop up here really fast. And one reason we want to introduce you is these are the people who, if you have like cultivation questions, they can help you with those things. And so thank you so much for joining us. Johanna, this is her very first day as master gardener. This is like a, yes! Which I just didn't have to ask, like, how difficult is it to become a master gardener?
It was challenging. It's competitive. The curriculum was
You had to like take out the other master gardeners like along the way?
Yeah.
Yeah. But what did you have to, like, what's the curriculum or what do you have to prove?
It's a pretty intensive, like 4 or 5 month curriculum, and you start with like the soil, and then you'll learn about insects and plants and propagation and compost and everything. And then there's a final, but it's open book, and you're allowed to work in groups. So and you have to just get a 70, so it's pretty low bar. Wow. Mostly what we do is we provide education for people. It's not that we know these things, but we could tell you where to go to maybe find these things out.
That's so cool. Green, do you have a particular, this is Green, by the way. Welcome, Green. Do you have a particular area of expertise or something that you love to grow or garden?
Well, I started growing vegetables as a toddler to feed the family, and that was one of my jobs. And I have enjoyed many different horticultural careers. I really love the Master Gardener program because I love research and I love sharing information. So it's a natural connection. The training program, you learn a little bit about a lot of different areas, but mostly you learn how to find the information. So the program is run through the University of California Cooperative Extension, and they share information, research-based information with farmers in the agricultural business. For the Master Gardeners, we're all volunteers, and we help everybody else. We have a helpline, so people can call in or email in. And
so,
ask
like, literally,
questions.
if something is going wrong with one of my plants,
Yeah.
call the helpline?
You can.
It's amazing. I never heard about it
Have I
until
never
I
done
came
that?
into the program.
That's like the turkey thing.
Master Gardeners, it's kind of more new in San Francisco. It's been around since the 1980s, but San Francisco, I feel like it's just
Well, San Mateo County and San Francisco County
together.
decided to combine and do one program, which is really great. Most of the counties in California have a program, but we had we lost our agricultural base in San Francisco in this, I think the last one was 79 or something. So at that point, the UC extension dropped out of San Francisco, but now we're getting more information back. And the Master Gardeners have been involved with I'm going to say it right, San Francisco Park and Rec, or Rec and Park now.
Yeah, right.
With the free compost giveaways and gardening resources and farmers markets and all these other kinds of things too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if you have these types of questions, they're going to.
We're here to help.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. We do have some pop-up shops in the lobby. We've got Clark from Flora Grub Gardens going to be there. Ana Prado from Blooming Coast, who I see here. Ricardo Buzo and Rebecca Campos from Las Selvas. Are they also here? Woo-hoo. Yeah, thank you. And Jamie Chan from Gardens of Golden Gate Park is also around if you want to talk more about the garden and you can't reach Kat through her throngs of new fans. I'm Alexis Madrigal. I'll be out there too. I do have my feral cabbages that I have been talking up. I need to go get them from my car, but I'll see you out there. Thank you so much for coming.